The dust had been settling on Grace Vance's traveling dress for 3 hours when she finally admitted to herself that the stagecoach was not coming. She sat on her worn leather trunk outside the telegraph office in Quartz Hill, Arizona, watching the sun climb higher in the cloudless September sky of 1878. The telegram from her brother had been clear. Arrive on the 15th. Take the afternoon stage to Prescott. He would meet her there. But now it was well past 2 o'clock, and the station master had just informed her that the afternoon run had been canceled. Bandits had hit the last coach 2 days prior, and the company was suspending service until they hired more armed guards. Grace pressed her handkerchief to her forehead, feeling the weight of disappointment settle in her chest. She had traveled all the way from St. Louis, spending the last of her savings on the train ticket after her employer had died and left her without work or lodging. Her brother Thomas was her only family, and he had promised her a fresh start helping him run his general store in Prescott. Now she was stranded in this dusty mining town with barely enough money for a meal, let alone lodging for however many days it might take for the stage line to resume. The street before her was typical of Arizona territory, wide and unpaved, lined with false-fronted buildings that promised more grandeur than they delivered. A saloon, a mercantile, a livery stable, and a scattering of other establishments she had not yet identified. Men in dusty clothes moved about their business, occasionally glancing her way with curiosity. A woman traveling alone was noteworthy, though not scandalous in these frontier towns where necessity often overrode propriety. Grace was 22 years old. With dark blonde hair she kept pinned in a practical bun and gray-blue eyes that had learned to assess situations quickly. Working as a governess for the past 4 years had taught her self-reliance, but it had not prepared her for this particular predicament. She was trying to calculate whether she had enough money for both dinner and a room at the boarding house when a shadow fell across her trunk. "Pardon me, miss, but I could not help overhearing your discussion with Mr. Hendricks at the telegraph office." Grace looked up, shading her eyes against the sun. The man standing before her was tall and lean, with the sun-weathered complexion of someone who spent his days outdoors. He wore typical cowboy attire: worn denim trousers, a blue cotton shirt, leather vest, and a wide-brimmed hat that he removed as he addressed her. His hair was dark brown, and his eyes were an unusual shade of amber. He appeared to be in his mid-20s, and his expression was respectful, even concerned. "I am sorry for your trouble," he continued when she did not immediately respond. "The stage situation is unfortunate timing for you." "Indeed it is," Grace said, maintaining a polite but cautious tone. She had learned to be wary of strange men, though this one seemed genuine enough. "Do you know when service might resume?" "Hard to say. Could be a week, could be longer. The Dalton gang has been working this territory pretty hard lately." He shifted his weight, seeming to consider his next words carefully. "Forgive me for being forward, miss, but are you trying to reach Prescott?" "Yes, my brother lives there. He is expecting me, though I have no way to inform him of the delay." Grace felt a flutter of worry. Thomas would be waiting at the Prescott station, wondering what had become of her. The cowboy nodded slowly. "I am headed in that direction myself, though not exactly to Prescott. I run a horse ranch about 20 miles southeast of there, near Williamson Valley. I came to Quartz Hill to pick up supplies and some equipment from the mining company." He paused, seeming to debate with himself. "I have a wagon, and the route I take passes within 10 miles of Prescott. I would be happy to offer you transportation, if you are comfortable with that arrangement." Grace studied him carefully. Every instinct warned her against accepting rides from strangers, Yet every practical bone in her body recognized this might be her best option. "That is very kind of you, but I could not possibly impose. It would be no imposition. I am making the journey regardless, and I have plenty of room in the wagon. My supplies will not take up much space." He seemed to sense her hesitation and added, "My name is Lucas Sterling. I have lived in the territory for 5 years now. You can ask anyone in town about me. Mr. Hendricks at the telegraph office knows me well, as does Pastor Williams at the church." The fact that he offered references impressed her. A dishonest man would hardly encourage inquiries into his character. Still, Grace wanted to be certain. "Mr. Sterling, I appreciate your offer, but I hope you understand my caution. Of course, a woman traveling alone should be cautious." He replaced his hat. "Why do not you speak with Mr. Hendricks? I will be at the livery stable loading my wagon for the next hour or so. If you decide you would like to accept my offer, you can find me there. Either way, I wish you the best of luck." He tipped his hat and walked away before she could respond, leaving Grace both surprised and impressed by his consideration. Most men would have been offended by her hesitation, or would have pressed their case more aggressively. Instead, Lucas Sterling had simply provided her with the means to verify his character and left the decision entirely in her hands. Grace stood and brushed the dust from her skirt. The telegraph office was only a few steps away, and Mr. Hendricks was still behind his counter, sorting through papers. "Excuse me, Mr. Hendricks." The station master looked up, adjusting his spectacles. He was a middle-aged man with graying hair and a patient demeanor. "Yes, Miss Vance." "Has something else come up? A man named Lucas Sterling just spoke to me. He offered to give me a ride toward Prescott in his wagon. He said you could vouch for his character." Mr. Hendricks smiled, which eased some of Grace's worry. "Lucas Sterling is one of the most honest men I know, miss. He has a horse ranch east of here, breeds and trains some of the finest horses in the territory, sells to the cavalry and to ranchers from here to California. He comes through Quartz Hill every few months for supplies. If Lucas offered you a ride, you can trust him to deliver you safely." "He seems very respectful," Grace ventured. "That he is. His father was a preacher back in Texas, from what I understand. Lucas has those values in him, even if he chose ranching over the pulpit." Mr. Hendricks set down his papers. "Miss Vance, I cannot tell you what to do, but if I had a daughter in your situation, I would tell her to accept Lucas's offer. You might be waiting a long time for the stage, and you would burn through your money on lodging. Lucas will get you close to Prescott, and from there you can hire a local wagon to take you the rest of the way." Grace felt her tension ease. "Thank you, Mr. Hendricks. That is very helpful." She returned to her trunk, mind racing through the practical considerations. She had perhaps enough money for 3 days of meals and lodging, maybe 4 if she was very careful. The stage might not run again for a week or more. And while Lucas Sterling was a stranger, he had been vouched for by the telegraph operator, who seemed to know everyone in town. Sometimes one had to take calculated risks, and this seemed like a reasonable one. Grace picked up her carpetbag, the lighter of her 2 pieces of luggage, and left the trunk where it sat. She would ask Mr. Sterling about the trunk if she decided to accept his offer. The livery stable was easy to find, a large wooden structure with a corral attached. Inside, she found Lucas loading crates into a sturdy wagon hitched to 2 draft horses. He noticed her approach and straightened, wiping his hands on his trousers. "Miss Vance." "Mr. Sterling, I spoke with Mr. Hendricks, and he spoke very highly of you." Grace set down her carpetbag. "I would like to accept your offer if it still stands. I can pay you something for the trouble." Lucas shook his head. "No payment necessary. As I said, I am making the trip anyway." He glanced at her bag. Is that your only luggage? No, I have a trunk outside the telegraph office. It is rather heavy, I am afraid. Not a problem. Let me finish securing these crates and then I will fetch it. He worked as he talked, his movements efficient and practiced. We will leave in about half an hour if that suits you. The journey will take most of the afternoon and into the evening. I know a safe place to camp if we do not make it all the way before dark, but we should reach the turnoff to Prescott by tomorrow morning at the latest. Tomorrow morning. Grace felt relief wash over her. That would be wonderful, Mr. Sterling. Thank you. Just Lucas, please. Mr. Sterling was my father. He smiled, and Grace noticed it reached his eyes, creating small crinkles at the corners. And what should I call you? Grace is fine. Grace it is, then. Lucas tied off a rope securing the crates. Have you eaten? It will be a long journey and I packed extra food, but if you would prefer a proper meal before we leave, we have time. Grace's stomach answered before she could, growling quietly. She had not eaten since a hurried breakfast at dawn. I confess I am rather hungry. The hotel dining room serves decent food, not fancy but filling. Let me treat you to lunch before we head out. I could not ask you to do that. Lucas picked up his hat and settled it on his head. You did not ask, I offered. Come on, before the midday rush clears them out of everything but beans. He led the way to the hotel, which was grander than Grace had expected for a mining town. The dining room had real tablecloths and curtains on the windows. They settled at a corner table, and Lucas ordered them both the lunch special: roasted chicken, potatoes, and green beans. While they waited, he asked about her journey from St. Louis. Grace found herself relaxing as she talked about the train ride, the changing landscape, the surprising cold of the desert nights. Lucas was an attentive listener, asking questions that showed genuine interest rather than mere politeness. When she mentioned she had worked as a governess, his eyebrows rose. You must be well educated then. I attended a ladies' academy in St. Louis. My parents believed in education for women, which was rather progressive of them. Grace felt the familiar pang of loss. They both died of influenza when I was 17. That is when I went to work for the Harrison family, caring for their 3 children. I am sorry about your parents, Lucas said, his tone sincere. It is hard losing family. Do you have family, Lucas? My father died about 7 years ago back in Texas. Heart gave out. My mother remarried a couple of years later, which was good for her. She is happy with her new husband, a merchant in San Antonio. I have 2 younger sisters, both married now with children of their own. He smiled. I am Uncle Lucas to 4 nieces and nephews I hardly ever see. Do you miss Texas? Sometimes, but I love the territory. The land here speaks to something in me. Wide open spaces, mountains in the distance, sky that goes on forever. He paused as the waitress brought their food. I came out here with just a horse, a saddle, and $100 I had saved working on various ranches. Found this valley with good water and grass, filed a claim and started catching wild horses. Built it up from nothing. Now I have about 200 acres, a decent house, a barn, and stock that people seek me out to buy. Grace heard the pride in his voice, and it was justified. Building a successful ranch from scratch took tremendous work and skill. That is quite an accomplishment. It has been 5 years of hard work, but I would not trade it for anything. Lucas cut into his chicken. What about you? What are your plans in Prescott? My brother Thomas runs a general store there. His wife died last year in childbirth, along with the baby. He has been struggling to manage the store and care for his 2 older children. He wrote and asked if I would come help him. The family I worked for had just lost their patriarch, and the widow was moving back east to live with her own family, so the timing seemed providential. Seems like both you and your brother are due for some better fortune. Lucas observed. They ate and talked, and Grace found herself enjoying the conversation more than she had expected. Lucas was intelligent and thoughtful, with a dry sense of humor that emerged occasionally. He asked about the books she had read with her students, and when she mentioned Jules Verne, his face lit up. "I read Journey to the Center of the Earth last winter," he said. "Ordered it from a catalog and waited 3 months for it to arrive. Read the whole thing in 2 days. Did you enjoy it?" "Very much. Made me think about how much of the world we still do not understand. I like that, the idea that there are still mysteries to solve and places to explore." Grace found this aspect of Lucas intriguing. He was a rancher, a man who worked with his hands and lived a physically demanding life, yet he read adventure novels and thought about mysteries and exploration. It suggested depths she had not expected from a cowboy. After lunch, Lucas retrieved her trunk while Grace waited with the wagon. He lifted it easily, which impressed her given its weight, and secured it alongside his crates. Then he helped her up onto the wagon seat, his hand steady and respectful as he supported her arm. "Ready?" he asked, climbing up beside her. "Ready." Lucas snapped the reins, and the horses started forward, pulling them out of Quartz Hill and onto the road heading west. Grace took a last look at the town, then turned her attention to the landscape ahead. The road wound through high desert terrain, dotted with scrub brush and occasional stands of juniper. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks sharp against the brilliant blue sky. The afternoon sun was hot, but the movement of the wagon created a breeze that made it bearable. Lucas pointed out landmarks as they traveled: a distinctive rock formation, a dried creek bed that would run full during the monsoon season, the distant shape of Granite Mountain. "You make this journey often?" Grace asked. "Every few months. I need supplies I cannot get locally, and I deliver horses to buyers in different towns. Quartz Hill has the telegraph office, which is useful, and the mining company there sometimes needs horses for their operations." He guided the horses around a rough patch in the road. "What made you decide to leave St. Louis? That is a big city compared to Prescott." "I needed a fresh start," Grace said simply. "The life of a governess is somewhat lonely. You are part of the family, but not truly family. You are educated, but you are an employee. It is an odd position to occupy." When Thomas wrote asking for help, it seemed like an opportunity to have real family again, to be needed in a different way. Lucas nodded. "I understand that. After my father died, I felt unmoored for a while. My mother had her own grief to manage, and I felt like I was just in the way. That is part of why I came out here. Needed to build something that was mine, to have a purpose that I had chosen for myself." "Have you found that purpose?" "I have. My horses are known throughout the territory now. I get orders from people I have never met, just on the reputation of the stock I raise. That means something. It means I have built something real and valuable." He looked at her. "Do you think you will find purpose helping your brother?" Grace considered the question. "I hope so. I love children, and I am excited to get to know my niece and nephew better. And helping Thomas rebuild his life after losing his wife seems like worthy work." "It is worthy work," Lucas agreed. "Family matters, even when it is complicated." They traveled in comfortable silence for a while, the wagon wheels creaking rhythmically. Grace found herself studying Lucas from the corner of her eye. He was handsome in a rugged way, with strong features and capable hands. More than that, though, he was kind. She had met many men in her life, and she had learned to distinguish between those who were genuinely good and those who merely performed goodness when it served their interests. Lucas seemed to fall into the former category. As the afternoon wore on, the landscape gradually changed. They climbed into higher elevations, where ponderosa pines began to appear among the scrub. The air grew slightly cooler, which was a relief. Lucas pointed out deer in the distance and a hawk circling overhead. He seemed completely at ease in this wild country, reading the land like Grace might read a book. "How much farther to your ranch?" she asked. "From Prescott. About 2 hours by horse, a bit longer by wagon. It is in a valley between two ridges with a year-round creek running through it. That water is worth more than gold out here." "It sounds beautiful." "It is. I never get tired of coming home and seeing that valley spread out before me." He glanced at the sun, which was beginning its descent toward the western horizon. "We will not make it all the way to the Prescott turnoff before dark. There is a good camping spot about an hour ahead, near a spring. We can stop there for the night and finish the journey in the morning." Grace felt a flutter of nervousness. Camping alone with Lucas was far more intimate than traveling by day, even though nothing improper would happen. She trusted Lucas's character, but she also knew how gossip could twist innocent situations. Lucas must have sensed her hesitation. "There are some trees near the spring that will give you privacy for your camp. I will set up on the other side of the clearing. We will be close enough to be safe, but with proper distance between us." His matter-of-fact tone and his clear understanding of the proprieties eased her worry. "Thank you, Lucas. I appreciate your consideration. It is just common sense and decency," he said. "Besides, my mother would tan my hide if she thought I had compromised a lady's reputation, even unintentionally." Grace smiled at that image. "She sounds formidable." "She is. 5 feet tall and built like a sparrow, but with the force of will of a cavalry general. My sisters and I never got away with anything growing up." The camping spot Lucas had mentioned appeared as the sun was touching the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was a small clearing surrounded by pines, with a spring bubbling up from the rocks and forming a clear pool before trickling away into the brush. The sound of the water was soothing, and the air smelled of pine and earth. Lucas pulled the wagon to a stop and jumped down, then came around to help Grace descend. His hands were warm and steady as he lifted her down, and for a moment they stood close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his amber eyes. Then he stepped back, breaking the moment. "Let me get your trunk down for you," he said, his voice slightly rougher than before. While Lucas unloaded, Grace walked to the spring and knelt beside it, cupping the cold water in her hands and drinking. It tasted clean and sweet, so cold it made her teeth ache. She splashed some on her face and neck, washing away the dust of travel, and felt instantly refreshed. Behind her, Lucas was setting up camp with efficient movements. He unrolled a canvas tarp and laid out blankets, creating a simple but adequate sleeping area beneath one of the larger pines. Then he moved to the opposite side of the clearing and began setting up his own camp. Grace realized she should probably help with something, but she was not entirely sure what to do. Her experience with camping was non-existent. "Lucas, how can I help? You know how to make a fire." "I am afraid not," he smiled, not mockingly but with patience. "Come here then, I will teach you. It is a useful skill to have." Grace crossed the clearing to where Lucas was arranging stones in a circle. He explained the process as he worked. First, create a safe fire ring with rocks. Then gather tinder, small dry grass and twigs. Next, kindling, slightly larger sticks. Finally, larger wood for fuel. He showed her how to arrange the tinder in a small pile, how to place the kindling in a teepee shape above it, how to strike a match and shield it from the breeze until the tinder caught. "Fire needs 3 things," he explained. "Fuel, heat, and air. You are managing all 3 when you build a fire properly." Grace watched the small flame grow into a crackling fire, feeling a sense of accomplishment. "I did it." "You did. Now you can make a fire anywhere." Lucas added larger pieces of wood. Let me get some food prepared. Are you hungry? Starting to be. From his supplies, Lucas produced bacon, beans, and coffee. He set a pan on the fire and started cooking, the smell of frying bacon making Grace's mouth water. While he cooked, she retrieved her carpet bag and found her brush, then sat on a rock near her sleeping area and began taking down her hair. It fell past her shoulders in waves, and she brushed out the tangles and dust from the journey. When she glanced across the clearing, she caught Lucas watching her. He looked away quickly, focusing intently on the bacon, and Grace felt an unexpected warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. She had been watched by men before, often with looks that made her uncomfortable. But Lucas's gaze had been different, appreciative but not predatory. It made her feel seen in a way she had not experienced before. She rebraided her hair loosely and went to join Lucas by the fire. He had filled 2 tin plates with bacon and beans, and he handed her one along with a fork. "It is not fancy," he apologized. "It is perfect," Grace said and meant it. They ate together as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. The fire crackled and popped, sending up occasional sparks. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled and Grace shivered. "Don't worry," Lucas said. "Coyotes are skittish. They will not come near the fire." "I am not accustomed to wild country," Grace admitted. The most dangerous thing in St. Louis was crossing the street when the carriages were rushing by. Lucas chuckled. "The West takes some getting used to, but you will adapt. People are tougher than they think they are." After dinner, Lucas cleaned the dishes at the spring while Grace prepared for sleep. She changed into her nightdress behind the cover of her trunk, then wrapped herself in the blankets Lucas had provided. The ground was harder than any bed she had known, but the blankets were thick and warm. Across the clearing, Lucas had settled into his own bedroll, his hat tipped over his face. The fire burned down to coals, casting a soft glow. "Lucas," Grace called softly. "Yes, thank you for all of this." "You have been very kind." There was a pause, then his voice came through the darkness, warm and sincere. "You are welcome, Grace. Sleep well. You too." Grace closed her eyes, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the wilderness night. The whisper of wind through the pines, the distant call of an owl, the soft crackle of the dying fire. Despite being in the middle of nowhere with a man she had just met, she felt safe. More than that, she felt something stirring in her chest that she had not felt before. A kind of anticipation that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with possibility. She fell asleep thinking about amber eyes and capable hands, about a man who read adventure novels and built fires with patient instruction, about the warmth in her stomach when he had lifted her down from the wagon. These were dangerous thoughts, she knew. She was going to Prescott to help her brother, not to entertain romantic notions about a cowboy she would probably never see again after tomorrow. But the thoughts persisted anyway, following her into dreams. Grace woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. The sun was just rising, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Across the clearing, Lucas had already rebuilt the fire and was cooking breakfast. He looked up when he heard her stirring. "Morning. Hope I did not wake you." "Not at all." Grace sat up, running her fingers through her messy braid. "What time is it?" "Just past dawn. I wanted to get an early start so we can reach the Prescott Road by mid-morning." He poured coffee into a tin cup and brought it to her. "Careful, it is hot." Grace accepted the cup gratefully, wrapping her hands around its warmth. The morning air was cool, almost cold, so different from the heat of the previous day. She sipped the coffee, strong and bitter, but exactly what she needed. "Did you sleep well?" Lucas asked. "Better than I expected, given the circumstances. You?" "Like a stone. I always sleep well out here." He returned to the fire to flip the bacon. "We have about 4 hours of travel ahead of us. Once we reach the road to Prescott, it will be about another hour to town." Grace did her best to make herself presentable, washing at the spring and changing into fresh clothes behind her trunk. When she emerged, Lucas had breakfast ready: bacon, hard biscuits, and more coffee. They ate quickly, both eager to complete the journey. Lucas loaded the wagon while Grace rolled up her bedding, and within half an hour they were back on the road, the morning sun warming their backs. The conversation flowed more easily today, as if sleeping near each other had broken down some invisible barrier. Lucas told her about his horses, describing the process of breaking wild mustangs, of teaching them to accept a saddle and rider. Grace talked about the children she had cared for, the funny things they had said, the lessons she had taught. "You ever want children of your own?" Lucas asked, then immediately looked embarrassed. "I apologize, that was too personal." "No, it is all right," Grace said. She had thought about this question often. "I do want children someday. I love teaching and caring for them. But I also want them to be truly mine, not just children I am paid to tend. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense." Lucas was quiet for a moment. "I want children too. I built my ranch with that in mind, actually, a place where a family could grow and thrive. But so far it has just been me and my horses." "Have you courted anyone since coming to the territory?" Lucas shook his head. "There are not many single women in the valley where I live, and the ones who are there are either too young or already spoken for. I go to town dances when I can, but I have not met anyone who seemed right." He glanced at her, then back at the road. "What about you? Did you have suitors in St. Louis?" "A few. Other employees of the Harrison family mostly. A tutor for the boys, a bookkeeper who came by regularly. But nothing serious. Working as a governess left little time or energy for courtship." She did not mention that none of those men had stirred any real feeling in her, that she had always felt like she was going through the motions of interest without the substance behind it. The road climbed into foothills thick with ponderosa pines and scrub oak. The air was fragrant with their scent, and the shade provided relief from the climbing sun. Lucas pointed out wild turkeys scratching in the underbrush and a black bear in the distance, ambling through the trees. "They usually avoid people," he assured Grace when she tensed. "As long as we do not surprise one or get between a mother and her cubs, we will be fine." Around mid-morning they crested a rise and Lucas pointed ahead. "There, that is the road to Prescott." Grace saw the intersection ahead, another dirt road branching off from the one they traveled. Her heart gave a strange lurch. This was where their journey together would end. Lucas would point her toward Prescott, perhaps ride with her to the edge of town, and then they would part ways. She would go to her brother's house, he would return to his ranch, and this brief interlude would be over. The thought made her chest ache in a way she had not anticipated. Lucas pulled the wagon to a stop at the intersection. He turned to face her, his expression serious. "Grace, I need to tell you something before we go any farther." Her heart began to beat faster. "What is it?" "I enjoyed these hours we have spent together more than I have enjoyed anyone's company in a very long time. You are intelligent, kind, and interesting to talk to. I know we have only just met, and I know you have obligations to your brother, but I would very much like to see you again, if you are willing." Grace felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I would like that too." Relief flooded Lucas's features. "Truly, truly." "I have enjoyed your company as well, Lucas. Very much." He smiled, and it transformed his whole face. "Then may I call on you in Prescott, perhaps this Sunday if your brother would not object?" "I cannot imagine he would object to meeting someone who helped me reach him safely." "Yes, Lucas, you may call on me." They sat there grinning at each other like fools for a moment. The wagon stopped in the middle of the intersection, the horses stamping impatiently. Then Lucas cleared his throat and snapped the reins, guiding them onto the Prescott road. The town appeared gradually, first a few scattered buildings, then more clustered together, until they were rolling down the main street of a proper frontier town. Prescott was larger than Quartz Hill, with several hotels, multiple saloons, churches, and shops lining the wide dirt streets. People moved about their business, wagons and riders passing in both directions. "Where is your brother's store?" Lucas asked. "On Montezuma Street," he wrote, "the General Mercantile." Lucas navigated through the streets until they found it, a sturdy building with a false front and a painted sign reading Vance General Mercantile. He pulled the wagon to a stop in front, and almost immediately the door flew open. A man rushed out, his face a mixture of worry and relief. He was in his early 30s with the same dark blonde hair as Grace, though his was receding slightly at the temples. "Grace, thank God, I have been worried sick. The stagecoach never arrived and I had no idea what had become of you." Grace barely had time to stand before Thomas was helping her down and pulling her into a tight embrace. "I am fine, Thomas. I am so sorry you were worried. What happened? Where have you been?" "The stage was canceled due to bandit activity. This is Lucas Sterling. He was kind enough to offer me transportation from Quartz Hill." Thomas turned to Lucas, who had climbed down from the wagon, and extended his hand. "Mr. Sterling, I cannot thank you enough for helping my sister. I have been half out of my mind imagining all sorts of terrible scenarios." Lucas shook his hand firmly. "It was my pleasure, Mr. Vance. Grace is excellent company." Something in Lucas's tone made Thomas look between them with interest, but he said nothing, just helped Lucas unload Grace's trunk and carpetbag from the wagon. "Will you come in?" Thomas asked Lucas. "Let me at least offer you some coffee or a meal to thank you properly." Lucas hesitated, glancing at Grace. She gave him a small nod, wanting him to stay just a little longer. "Coffee would be appreciated, thank you." They entered the store, which was well stocked and organized. Shelves lined the walls, holding everything from canned goods to fabric to tools. A counter ran along the back wall, and stairs led up to what Grace assumed were the family's living quarters. Thomas locked the front door and flipped the sign to closed, then led them upstairs. The living space was modest but comfortable, with a sitting area, a kitchen, and what looked like 2 bedrooms off a short hallway. 2 children sat at a table working on slates, a girl of about 8 and a boy perhaps 6 years old. "Children, come meet your Aunt Grace," Thomas called. The children scrambled over, shy but curious. The girl had her father's blonde hair in 2 braids, and the boy had darker hair and solemn brown eyes. "This is Elizabeth," Thomas said, resting his hand on the girl's shoulder, "and this is James. Children, this is your Aunt Grace, who I told you would be coming to live with us." "Hello," Grace said warmly, crouching down to their level. "I am so happy to finally meet you both. Your father has told me wonderful things about you in his letters." Elizabeth smiled tentatively. "Papa said you know lots of stories." "I do indeed. Perhaps tonight after supper I can tell you one." James, still shy, pressed against his father's leg but watched Grace with interest. Thomas made coffee while Grace and Lucas sat at the table with the children. Elizabeth, warming up quickly, peppered Grace with questions about her journey and St. Louis. James remained quiet but attentive, his eyes moving between the adults. When Thomas brought the coffee, he settled into a chair and looked at Lucas. "So you have a ranch near here?" "In Williamson Valley, about 20 miles southeast. I raise and train horses." "Sterling," Thomas mused. "Are you the one who sold those 3 horses to Samuel Briggs last spring? He has been bragging about them all over town." Lucas nodded. "Those were mine. Good stock, well trained." Samuel said they were the best horses he had ever owned, and he is not a man who praises lightly. Thomas sipped his coffee. You did my sister a great service, Mr. Sterling. If there is ever anything I can do to repay the kindness, you need only ask. No repayment necessary. But I would like your permission to call on Grace if she is amenable. Thomas's eyebrows rose and he looked at his sister. Grace felt her cheeks heat, but she met her brother's gaze steadily. I am amenable. A slow smile spread across Thomas's face. Well then, Mr. Sterling, I have no objection, though I will say I did not expect my sister to arrive in town with a suitor already in tow. Neither did I, Grace admitted, which made Lucas laugh. After finishing his coffee, Lucas stood to leave. I should be getting back. I have horses to tend to. Grace walked him down to the wagon, leaving Thomas and the children upstairs. On the street, with the midday sun beating down, they stood beside the wagon and Lucas looked at her with an expression that made her heart race. Sunday, he said. I will come around 2 o'clock if that suits you. That suits me perfectly. Lucas climbed into the wagon, then paused and looked down at her. Grace, I am very glad the stagecoach did not come. She smiled up at him, feeling bold. So am I, Lucas. He tipped his hat and snapped the reins, guiding the horses back down Montezuma Street. Grace stood watching until the wagon disappeared around a corner, feeling as if her life had just shifted in some fundamental way. When she returned upstairs, Thomas was watching her with knowing eyes. He seems like a good man. He is, Grace said firmly, and you like him. I do. Grace met her brother's gaze. Is that all right? Thomas crossed the room and hugged her. It is more than all right. I want you to be happy, Grace. You have sacrificed enough taking care of other people's children, other people's families. You deserve your own happiness. Grace hugged him back, feeling the last of her worry dissolve. Thank you, Thomas. The next few days fell into a comfortable rhythm. Grace learned the layout of the town, met the regular customers who came into the store, and got to know her niece and nephew better. Elizabeth was bright and talkative, eager for a female presence in her life. She followed Grace everywhere, asking questions and helping with chores. James was more reserved, but he gradually warmed to Grace, especially when she read to him before bed. Thomas's pain over losing his wife was evident, but he was managing, pouring himself into his work and his children. Grace could see how much he needed help, how exhausted he was from trying to do everything alone. She took over the cooking and the children's lessons, freeing Thomas to focus on the store during the day. On Saturday evening, as Grace was putting the children to bed, Elizabeth said, "Is Mr. Sterling your beau, Aunt Grace?" Grace blinked in surprise. "What makes you ask that?" "Papa said he is coming to call tomorrow, and Mama always said that when a man comes calling, it means he wants to court a lady." Grace chose her words carefully. "Mr. Sterling and I are getting to know each other. We might become beau, but it is too early to say for certain." Elizabeth considered this. "I liked him. He smiled at us kindly and he had nice eyes." "He does have nice eyes," Grace agreed, tucking the blanket around Elizabeth's chin. In the next room, she could hear Thomas reading to James. The sound of his voice, patient and gentle with his son, made her heart squeeze. Her brother was a good father, even in his grief. Sunday arrived with clear skies and warm sunshine. Grace dressed carefully in her best day dress, a soft green cotton that brought out her eyes. She arranged her hair in a more elaborate style than usual, pinning it up with the silver combs her mother had given her years ago. Thomas watched her preparations with amusement. "You look lovely, Grace." "Thank you." She checked her reflection one more time, then forced herself to step away from the mirror. "I am being silly, aren't I? You are being normal. It is nice to see you excited about something." At exactly 2 o'clock, there was a knock at the door downstairs. Grace's heart jumped. Thomas went to answer it while Grace took a steadying breath. Lucas's voice drifted up the stairs, greeting Thomas warmly. Then footsteps, and Lucas appeared at the top of the stairs. He had clearly made an effort as well, wearing clean trousers and a pressed shirt, his hair neatly combed. His eyes lit up when he saw Grace. "Hello," he said softly. "Hello." Thomas cleared his throat. "I will be downstairs in the store if you need anything. Children, come help me with inventory." Elizabeth and James followed their father reluctantly, glancing back at Grace and Lucas with obvious curiosity. Once they were gone, Lucas crossed the room to stand before Grace. "You look beautiful," he said. "Thank you. You look very handsome yourself." They stood there, suddenly awkward after the easy companionship of their journey. Then Lucas smiled, and the tension broke. "Would you like to take a walk? Thomas said there is a nice park near the courthouse." "I would love to." They descended the stairs and stepped out into the warm afternoon. Prescott was quieter on Sundays, though not entirely still. They walked side by side down the wooden sidewalk, not quite touching but close enough that Grace was constantly aware of Lucas's presence beside her. The park was indeed lovely, with large trees providing shade and benches scattered throughout. They found an empty bench near a small pond where ducks paddled lazily. "How have you been settling in?" Lucas asked as they sat. "Very well. Elizabeth and James are wonderful children. Elizabeth is bright and curious, and James is warming up to me gradually. Thomas is managing, though I can see how tired he is. It must be hard, losing a spouse so young." "It is, but he is strong and the children give him purpose." Grace watched a duck dip its head under the water. "What about you? How is the ranch?" "Good. I had a foal born 2 days ago, a beautiful little filly. Her mother is one of my best mares, so I have high hopes for her." Lucas stretched his legs out in front of him. "I have been thinking." "About what?" "About how empty my house feels now when I come in from working. It never bothered me before, but after spending those hours talking with you, the silence feels heavier." Grace's breath caught. "Lucas." He turned to face her fully. "Grace, I know this is fast. I know we have only known each other a few days, but I felt something during our journey together, something I have never felt before. A sense of rightness, like I had been waiting to meet you without even knowing it." "I felt it too," Grace whispered. Lucas reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm around hers. "Then let me court you properly. Let me come to town every Sunday, let me get to know you better, let me show you who I am. And if, after some time, you feel the same way I do, then maybe we can talk about a future together." Grace looked at their joined hands, then up into his amber eyes. Everything about this was unexpected. She had come to Prescott expecting to spend her days helping her brother, perhaps eventually finding a position as a teacher if the town opened a school. She had not expected to meet a man like Lucas, someone who made her heart race and her stomach flip, someone who read adventure novels and trained wild horses, and looked at her like she was the most fascinating woman he had ever met. But here he was and here she was, and the feeling in her chest was too strong to ignore. "Yes," she said, "I would like that very much." Lucas's smile was brilliant. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently, a gesture that felt both chivalrous and intimate. "You have made me very happy, Grace." They sat together in the park for hours, talking about everything and nothing. Lucas told her about his childhood in Texas, his father's sermons that could make hardened cowboys weep, his mother's fierce love and fiercer discipline. Grace told him about her parents, her happy childhood before they died, the strange loneliness of living in someone else's home as an employee. As the sun began to sink lower, casting golden light through the trees, Lucas walked her back to the mercantile. At the door, He paused. "May I see you again next Sunday, please? I will count the days." He tipped his hat. "Goodbye, Grace." "Goodbye, Lucas." She watched him ride away on the horse he had tied behind the store, her hand pressed to her chest where her heart was beating fast and strong. The weeks that followed established a pattern. Lucas came to Prescott every Sunday, and they spent the afternoons together. Sometimes they walked in the park. Sometimes they attended church services together. Sometimes they simply sat in the store's sitting room and talked while Thomas minded the children. With each visit, Grace learned more about Lucas, and her feelings for him deepened. He told her about the challenges of building his ranch, the winters when he nearly gave up, the satisfaction of selling his first trained horse. He talked about his dreams of expanding the ranch, of breeding horses that were not only strong but intelligent and willing. His passion for his work was evident in every word, and Grace loved listening to him. She told him about the books she loved, the lessons she had taught, the small moments of joy in caring for children. She confessed her fears about being a burden to her brother, her worry that she would never have a home that was truly hers. Lucas listened intently, never dismissing her concerns, always finding the right words to reassure her. After a month of Sunday visits, Lucas arrived with a carefully wrapped package. "I brought you something," he said, almost shyly. Grace unwrapped it to find a book, Around the World in 80 Days by Jules Verne. "Oh, Lucas, you mentioned you had not read that one yet." "I ordered it from the same catalog I use. It arrived this week." Grace hugged the book to her chest, touched by his thoughtfulness. "Thank you. This is wonderful. Maybe you could read it aloud to me on our visits. I would enjoy hearing you read." So they began reading together, Grace's voice bringing the adventures to life while Lucas listened with complete attention. Sometimes Elizabeth and James would join them, curling up on the floor to listen to the story. Those afternoons became precious to Grace, these moments of shared imagination and closeness. After 2 months, Lucas invited Grace to visit his ranch. Thomas agreed to chaperone, bringing Elizabeth and James along. They all piled into a wagon early one Saturday morning and made the journey to Williamson Valley. The ranch was everything Lucas had described and more. The house was modest but well built, with a wide porch and large windows. The barn was sturdy and organized. The valley itself was breathtaking, with rolling grassland bordered by pine-covered ridges and a clear creek running through the middle. Lucas showed them everything with obvious pride. The foals frolicking in the pasture, the horses he was currently training in the corral, the vegetable garden he had planted and mostly neglected. Elizabeth and James were enchanted, especially when Lucas let them pet the gentle horses and feed them handfuls of oats. "It is beautiful," Grace told him, standing on the porch and looking out over the valley. "I can see why you love it here." "It is missing something, though," Lucas said quietly. "What?" He looked at her, his eyes intense. "A family to fill it, a wife's touch in the house. Children's laughter in the yard. It is a ranch built for a family, and I have been living in it alone." Grace's heart pounded. They had been courting for 2 months, seeing each other every week, and the feelings between them had only grown stronger. But this was the first time Lucas had spoken so directly about the future. "Lucas," she began, but he shook his head. "You do not have to say anything now. I just wanted you to see it, to know what I am hoping for, what I am working toward." Inside the house, Thomas was helping the children wash up at the kitchen pump. Through the window, Grace could see him laughing at something James said, the sound carrying through the open door. Her brother seemed lighter today, away from the store and the memories of his wife that haunted their living quarters. Grace looked at Lucas, at this good man who had come into her life so unexpectedly. who had offered her a destination better than the one she had been heading toward. She thought about the empty years ahead if she stayed in Prescott, helping Thomas until the children were grown, growing old in rooms that were not really hers. Then she thought about this valley, this ranch, this man who looked at her like she was precious. She thought about filling these rooms with love and laughter, about building something real and lasting with Lucas, about finally having a home that was truly hers. "I can see it," she said softly. "The family you are imagining, I can see it too." Lucas's face transformed with hope. "Truly." "Truly." He took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "Grace, I love you. I have loved you since that first day in Quartz Hill, I think, though I did not have the words for it then. You are everything I did not know I was looking for." Grace felt tears prick her eyes. "I love you too, Lucas. You have made me believe in possibilities I had given up on. Then stay with me. Not now, not today, but soon. Marry me, Grace. Build this life with me." The tears spilled over, but they were happy tears. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." Lucas pulled her into his arms, holding her close against his chest. Grace could hear his heart beating fast, matching the rhythm of her own. When he pulled back, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, gentle and sweet and full of promise. Inside, Thomas appeared in the doorway, took one look at them, and smiled. He quietly ushered the children to another room, giving Grace and Lucas privacy for this moment that was reshaping both their futures. When they finally pulled apart, Lucas was smiling so wide Grace thought his face might split. "I want to do this properly. Talk to Thomas, plan a real wedding, give you time to be sure." "I am sure, Lucas. But yes, we will do it properly." Grace laughed, feeling giddy. "When should we tell Thomas?" "Now," Lucas suggested. They found Thomas in the main room, keeping the children occupied with a carved wooden horse he had found on a shelf. When Grace and Lucas entered, hand in hand, Thomas took one look at their faces and stood. "I take it congratulations are in order." "I have asked Grace to marry me, and she has accepted," Lucas said formally. "I am asking for your blessing as her only family." Thomas crossed the room and shook Lucas's hand firmly. "You have my blessing and my thanks for making my sister so happy." He hugged Grace. "I am thrilled for you, truly." "Papa, what is happening?" Elizabeth asked. Thomas crouched down to the children's level. "Aunt Grace and Mr. Sterling are getting married. That means Aunt Grace will live here on the ranch with Mr. Sterling, and we will come visit them often." James's face fell. "Aunt Grace is leaving." Grace knelt beside him, her heart squeezing. "I will not be far, sweetheart, just a few hours away, and you can come visit me and I will come visit you. I am not disappearing." "Promise?" James asked in a small voice. "I promise." Elizabeth, more pragmatic, asked, "Will you have babies? Will we have cousins?" Grace and Lucas exchanged a glance, both blushing. "Perhaps someday," Grace said carefully. They spent the rest of the day at the ranch, with Lucas showing Thomas the operation and Grace exploring the house, already planning changes and improvements in her mind. It needed curtains and some proper furniture for the sitting room, and the kitchen could use better organization. But the bones were good and the potential was clear. As they prepared to leave that evening, Lucas pulled Grace aside. "How long do you need to plan a wedding?" "How long do you want to wait?" Lucas grinned. "If it were up to me, we would ride to the courthouse tomorrow and be done with it." "But I know women want proper weddings, and you deserve that." Grace considered. She had no mother to help plan an elaborate affair, no grand social circle to impress. What she wanted was to marry Lucas and start their life together. "What about 6 weeks?" "That gives us time to do it properly without dragging it out unnecessarily." 6 weeks, Lucas repeated. "I can wait 6 weeks. Barely." They set the date for the first Saturday in December. The intervening weeks were a flurry of activity. Grace sewed a wedding dress with help from the dressmaker in town, a simple but elegant design in cream-colored silk. Thomas insisted on hosting a wedding supper at the hotel dining room, inviting Lucas's friends from the valley and the regular customers from the store who had become Grace's friends. Lucas came to town every weekend, sometimes to help with wedding preparations, sometimes just to see Grace. They took walks, read together, and talked about their plans for the future. Grace would move to the ranch after the wedding, and they agreed she would visit Thomas and the children regularly, perhaps once every 2 weeks. "The children need you," Lucas acknowledged, "and I would never ask you to abandon them. We will make it work." His understanding and flexibility only made Grace love him more. The week before the wedding, Lucas's mother arrived from San Antonio, traveling by train and stage. Margaret Sterling was exactly as Lucas had described: small, energetic, and formidable. She embraced Grace the moment they met. "Let me look at you," Margaret said, holding Grace at arm's length. "Oh, you are lovely, and my son is clearly besotted. Thank the Lord, I was beginning to think he would live alone with those horses forever." "Mother," Lucas protested, but he was smiling. Margaret stayed with Thomas and the children, taking over many of the wedding preparations with efficient authority. She and Grace bonded quickly, working side by side to address envelopes for invitations and plan the menu for the supper. "Lucas's father would have loved you," Margaret told Grace one evening as they folded napkins. "He always said Lucas needed someone who could match his mind as well as his heart. You are that person." "I hope to make him happy," Grace said sincerely. "You already do, dear." "I can see it in his face. He has never looked so content." The night before the wedding, Grace could not sleep. She lay in her bed at Thomas's house, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of the change about to occur. Tomorrow she would become Grace Sterling, a rancher's wife, a woman with a home of her own. It was everything she had hoped for, yet it still felt enormous. There was a soft knock, and Elizabeth peeked around the door. "Aunt Grace, are you awake? Come in, sweetheart." Elizabeth climbed into bed beside her, cuddling close. "Are you scared?" "A little," Grace admitted. "Big changes are always a little frightening, even when they are good changes." "I will miss you." "I will miss you too, but I will visit often and you will visit me. We will not lose each other." Elizabeth was quiet for a moment. "Mr. Sterling will take good care of you, won't he?" "He will, and I will take good care of him." "That is what Mama used to say, that marriage is two people taking care of each other." Grace hugged Elizabeth close, touched that the little girl was sharing this memory. "Your Mama was very wise." They fell asleep like that, curled up together, Elizabeth's small body warm against Grace's side. When Grace woke in the morning, she felt peaceful. The nervousness had burned away, leaving only anticipation. Margaret helped her dress, lacing the corset and buttoning the dozens of tiny buttons up the back of the dress. Grace's hair was arranged in an elegant updo, with a few curls framing her face. Margaret pinned a simple veil to her hair, the tulle falling softly around her shoulders. "Perfect," Margaret declared. "You are a beautiful bride, Grace." The wedding was held at the small church in Prescott, with Pastor Williams officiating. The pews were full of friends. Thomas and the children in the front row, Lucas's friends from the valley scattered throughout, regular customers from the store who had become fond of Grace. Margaret sat in the front row on the groom's side, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. But Grace only had eyes for Lucas, standing at the front of the church in a new suit, his hair neatly combed, his eyes locked on her as she walked down the aisle on Thomas's arm. The love in his gaze took her breath away. Thomas placed her hand in Lucas's, then stepped back. Pastor Williams began the ceremony, his voice rich and warm as he spoke about love and commitment, about two people becoming one family. When it came time for the vows, Lucas's voice was steady and sure. I, Lucas Sterling, take you, Grace Vance, to be my wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do us part. Grace repeated the vows, her own voice clear and strong. When Lucas slipped the simple gold band onto her finger, she felt something settle deep in her chest, a sense of rightness and completion. I now pronounce you husband and wife, Pastor Williams declared. Lucas, you may kiss your bride. Lucas cupped Grace's face in his hands and kissed her, gentle but thorough, a kiss that promised a lifetime of love. The congregation applauded, and Grace felt joy bubble up inside her, so strong she wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. They walked back down the aisle together, husband and wife, Grace's hand tucked into the crook of Lucas's arm. Outside the church, friends and family showered them with rice and good wishes. The wedding supper at the hotel was festive and warm. Thomas gave a touching toast about gaining a brother and being grateful his sister had found such a good man. Margaret told embarrassing stories about Lucas as a child, making everyone laugh. Lucas's friends from the valley offered their congratulations and promised to help the newlyweds with anything they needed. As the evening wound down, Lucas leaned close to Grace and whispered, "Ready to go home, home." The words sent a thrill through her. Yes. They said their goodbyes, with Grace promising Elizabeth and James she would see them soon. Margaret hugged them both, tears streaming down her face. Thomas embraced Grace tightly. "Be happy," he whispered in her ear. "I will. I am." Lucas had arranged for them to spend their wedding night at a room in the hotel, a luxury that meant they did not have to travel in the dark. He carried Grace over the threshold, making her laugh, and set her down gently in the middle of the room. The hotel had provided flowers and a bottle of wine. A fire crackled in the fireplace, warming the space. Grace suddenly felt shy, alone with Lucas in a way they had never been before. Lucas seemed to sense her nervousness. He poured them each a glass of wine and handed one to her. "To new beginnings." "To new beginnings," Grace echoed, clinking her glass against his. They sipped the wine, and gradually Grace's nervousness faded. This was Lucas, the man she loved, the man who had shown her nothing but kindness and respect. She set down her glass and went to him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "I love you," she said. "I love you too." Lucas kissed her forehead, then her cheeks, then her lips. "Are you happy?" "Happier than I have ever been." The next morning they left early for the ranch, eager to begin their new life together. The journey that had once taken hours passed quickly, filled with conversation and laughter. When they crested the ridge and the valley spread out before them, Lucas stopped the wagon. "Welcome home, Mrs. Sterling." Grace looked at the ranch below, at the house that was now hers, at the valley where she would build her life with this man she loved. "It is perfect." The first months of marriage were an adjustment. Grace learned the rhythms of ranch life, rising early to cook breakfast before Lucas headed out to work with the horses, spending her days tending the garden, managing the house, and learning to milk the cow Lucas had purchased. It was hard work, harder than anything she had done as a governess, but it was satisfying in a way that work had never been before. This was her home, her life, built by her own hands. Lucas was patient and kind, teaching her what she needed to know, never mocking her mistakes. When she burned the first batch of bread, he ate it anyway and declared it had character. When she forgot to close the chicken coop and a fox got in, killing 2 hens, he simply helped her clean up the mess and showed her how to secure the latch properly. In the evenings, they would sit together on the porch, watching the sun set over the valley. Lucas would tell her about his day, the progress with different horses, problems that had arisen and how he had solved them. Grace would share her own day, the small victories and frustrations. Sometimes they would read aloud to each other, working their way through Grace's growing collection of books. At night, in the privacy of their bedroom, they explored the physical side of their marriage. Grace, raised with Victorian modesty, had been nervous about this aspect of marriage, but Lucas was patient and tender, making sure she felt safe and cherished. Over time, her nervousness transformed into enthusiasm, and they found joy in this intimate connection. By spring, Grace suspected she might be pregnant. Her monthly courses had stopped, and she felt queasy in the mornings. She waited to be sure before telling Lucas, but when the signs continued, she could no longer keep the secret. She told him one evening after supper as they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge. "Lucas, I have something to tell you." He looked at her, immediately attentive. "What is it?" "I am fairly certain I am carrying a child." Lucas's face went through a rapid series of emotions: shock, joy, wonder, and a hint of fear. "Truly, truly." He pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "A baby. We are going to have a baby." His voice was thick with emotion. "Are you happy?" Grace asked, though she could feel his joy in the way he held her. "Happy, Grace, I am overwhelmed, terrified, thrilled." He pulled back to look at her face. "Are you all right? Do you need anything? Should you be sitting out here or should you be resting?" Grace laughed at his sudden worry. "I am fine. Pregnant women do not need to be wrapped in cotton. I feel well, just a bit queasy in the mornings." Over the following months, Grace's belly grew round. Lucas was attentive to the point of being overprotective, constantly trying to prevent her from lifting anything heavy or doing too much work. Grace found it both endearing and exasperating. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she told him when he tried to stop her from hanging laundry. "I know, but what if you hurt yourself? Women have been having babies for thousands of years while doing their regular work. I will be fine." Still, Grace was touched by his concern. He read everything he could find about pregnancy and childbirth, asking the doctor in Prescott dozens of questions during their visits. He built a beautiful cradle from oak wood, sanding it until it was smooth as silk. He even attempted to knit baby booties, though the results were lumpy and uneven. "They are perfect," Grace said, holding the lopsided booties with tears in her eyes. "Our baby will love them." Thomas and the children visited regularly, and Elizabeth and James were thrilled about the coming baby. Elizabeth helped Grace sew tiny gowns and blankets, her stitches careful and precise. James was more interested in the horses, spending hours with Lucas in the barn whenever they visited. In October of 1879, on a crisp autumn morning, Grace went into labor. Lucas rode hard to fetch the midwife from Williamson Valley, an experienced woman named Mrs. Patterson, who had delivered dozens of babies in the territory. She arrived calm and efficient, taking charge of the situation while Lucas paced anxiously outside. The labor was long and difficult, lasting well into the night. Grace bore it with as much grace as she could muster, focusing on Mrs. Patterson's instructions, drawing strength from knowing Lucas was just outside the door. When the baby finally came, just before dawn, Grace heard the first thin wail and felt relief wash over her. "It is a boy," Mrs. Patterson announced, wrapping the baby in a blanket. "A healthy, strong boy." Grace held out her arms and the midwife placed the baby in them. Grace looked down at her son, at his tiny red face and miniature fingers, and felt her heart expand in a way she had not known was possible. "Lucas," she called, "come meet your son." The door flew open and Lucas rushed in, his face pale but his eyes bright. He knelt beside the bed, looking at the baby with wonder. "He is perfect. He is ours," Grace whispered. They named him William Thomas Sterling after Lucas's father and Grace's brother. Little William had his father's dark hair and his mother's blue-gray eyes. Lucas held him with such tenderness, such awe, that Grace fell in love with her husband all over again. "Thank you," Lucas said softly, his eyes meeting Grace's over their son's head. "Thank you for this gift." The years that followed were full and rich. William grew into a sturdy, active boy who loved the horses as much as his father did. When he was 2, Grace gave birth to a daughter they named Margaret Rose, after Lucas's mother. 2 years after that came another son, Henry, and then another daughter, Sarah. The ranch prospered under Lucas's careful management. His reputation for breeding quality horses spread, and buyers came from as far as California and Colorado to purchase his stock. He expanded the operation, hiring a couple of ranch hands to help with the work, building new corrals and a larger barn. Grace found her place not just as a wife and mother, but as a partner in the ranch's success. She kept the books, managed the household, and even helped with gentling some of the younger horses. She also started teaching the ranch hands' children, holding lessons in the main room of the house 3 days a week. It gave her a sense of purpose beyond her family, a way to use her education and love of teaching. Thomas remarried when William was 3, wedding a widow named Sarah who had come to Prescott with her brother's family. She was kind and warm, and she loved Elizabeth and James as if they were her own. Grace was relieved to see her brother happy again, to know his children had a mother figure in their lives. The families visited back and forth regularly. Elizabeth and James grew close to their cousins, and the children ran wild together on those visits, exploring the valley and the creek, creating imaginary games that lasted for hours. Lucas's mother visited every year, spending weeks at a time doting on her grandchildren and helping Grace with the endless work of running a household. Margaret Sterling was beloved by all the children, who called her grandmother Maggie and followed her around begging for stories about their father's childhood. As the children grew, so did Grace's contentment. There were hard times, of course. One winter, a harsh storm killed several horses. Another year, drought threatened the pastures. There were illnesses and injuries, close calls that left Grace and Lucas shaken. But they weathered each challenge together, their partnership growing stronger with each passing year. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Lucas planned a surprise. He arranged for Thomas and Sarah to keep the children for the weekend, then took Grace on a trip back to Prescott. They stayed at the same hotel where they had spent their wedding night, ate supper at the same dining room, walked through the same park where they had first courted. "Do you ever regret it?" Lucas asked as they sat on their old bench by the pond. "Marrying me, living on the ranch instead of in town," Grace looked at him in surprise. "Regret it? Lucas, marrying you was the best decision I ever made. It has not been an easy life. The work is hard, the winters are cold, we are miles from town. And I have loved every moment of it," Grace said firmly. "Lucas, you gave me a home, not just a house, but a real home, a place where I belong completely. You gave me children I adore, a life full of purpose and your love." "How could I regret any of that?" Lucas pulled her close, kissing her temple. "I needed to hear that. Sometimes I worry I asked too much of you, taking you away from civilization to this rough country. You did not take me away from anything. You offered me something better, remember? A better destination than the one I was heading toward." She smiled up at him. "That day in Quartz Hill when you offered me a ride, you changed my entire life. The stagecoach might have taken me to Thomas's house, but you took me home." Lucas held her close, and they sat together as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant colors. Two people who had found their way to each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. Years continued to pass, marked by the small moments and large milestones of family life. William grew tall and strong, apprenticing with his father in the horse business. Margaret Rose showed a talent for drawing, filling sketchbooks with pictures of the ranch and the animals. Henry was the quiet one, always with his nose in a book, reminding Grace of herself at that age. Sarah was the wild one, fearless and adventurous, giving her parents equal measures of pride and gray hairs. When Grace was 35, she discovered she was pregnant again, surprising both her and Lucas. They had assumed their family was complete, but apparently life had other plans. This pregnancy was harder than the previous ones, leaving Grace exhausted and uncomfortable. Lucas hired a housekeeper to help with the daily work, insisting Grace rest as much as possible. The baby arrived in early spring, another boy they named Joseph. He was small but healthy, with bright eyes and a tendency to watch everything with intense focus. The older children adored him, taking turns holding him and helping care for him. As the children grew toward adulthood, Grace and Lucas began to talk about their own future. What would they do when the children were grown and gone? How would they fill their days? "I want to travel," Grace announced one evening. They were in their 40s now, with silver threading through their hair and lines around their eyes from years of sun and laughter. "I want to see San Francisco, maybe even take a train back to St. Louis and show you where I grew up." Lucas considered this. "I have never been farther west than Prescott or farther east than Texas. Traveling sounds appealing as long as you are with me. Where would you want to go?" "Montana, maybe. I have heard the horse ranches up there are impressive. It would be interesting to see how they operate." He pulled her close. "But mostly I just want to be wherever you are." They made good on these plans. As the children grew more capable of managing the ranch, Lucas and Grace took trips. They visited San Francisco and marveled at the city's energy and diversity. They traveled to San Antonio so Grace could meet Lucas's sisters and their families. They even took a train to St. Louis, where Grace showed Lucas the academy she had attended and the house where she had grown up, now owned by a different family. William married at 23, wedding a rancher's daughter from the next valley over. They built a house on the ranch property, and William became Lucas's full partner in the horse business. Margaret Rose left for San Francisco at 18 to study art, breaking her mother's heart but fulfilling her own dreams. Henry went east to college, much to everyone's surprise, planning to become a lawyer. Sarah married a cowboy who worked on a ranch near Flagstaff, and she seemed perfectly happy with her adventurous, untamed life. Joseph was still at home, just 16, but already showing signs of his father's skill with horses. On a warm summer evening when Grace was 50 and Lucas was 53, they sat on their porch watching the sunset, as they had done thousands of times before. Their grandchildren played in the yard, William's 3 children and Sarah's toddler daughter. The sounds of childish laughter and the soft whicker of horses in the barn created a familiar, beloved symphony. "You remember the day we met?" Grace asked. Lucas smiled. "Every detail. You sitting on that trunk outside the telegraph office, looking worried and determined all at once. I knew immediately you were someone special. I thought you were probably a scoundrel, offering rides to strange women. And what do you think now?" Grace leaned her head on his shoulder. "I think you are the best man I have ever known. I think you saw me when I was lost and offered me not just a ride but a whole new life. I think I am the luckiest woman in the world." Lucas kissed the top of her head. "The luck was all mine, Grace. You made this house a home. You made me a father. You made every day better just by being in it." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their grandchildren play, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to purple. The valley stretched out before them, the land they had worked and loved for decades, the home they had built together from nothing but hope and hard work and abiding love. "No regrets?" Lucas asked softly. "Not a single one," Grace replied. "Though I do sometimes wonder what would have happened if that stagecoach had come. You would have gone to Prescott, helped Thomas, maybe eventually married someone else. Maybe, but I doubt I would have been as happy." Grace lifted her head to look at him. "You offered me a better destination, Lucas. Not just a place, but a life. Our life, built together, full of love and family and purpose. That is so much better than any stagecoach ride could have been." Lucas pulled her close, and they watched the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. Around them, the ranch settled into evening quiet. The grandchildren were called inside by their parents. Lights appeared in the windows of William's house across the way. Somewhere a coyote called and the horses shifted in the barn. It was an ordinary evening, one of thousands they had shared. But it was also extraordinary because they were sharing it together. These two people who had found each other on a dusty Arizona road and built a life more beautiful than either had imagined possible. The years continued their steady march. Margaret Rose returned from San Francisco with a husband, an artist like herself, and they settled in Prescott, where they opened a gallery. Henry came home from law school and set up practice in Prescott, quickly becoming known as the best lawyer in the territory. Joseph took over more and more of the ranch work, showing the same dedication and skill his father had demonstrated decades earlier. Grace and Lucas grew old together, their bodies slowing but their minds and hearts as sharp as ever. They took walks through the valley, shorter now but just as sweet. They read to each other in the evenings, taking turns choosing books. They welcomed new grandchildren and then great-grandchildren, their family tree spreading wide and strong. On their 50th wedding anniversary, the family threw a huge celebration at the ranch. All the children and grandchildren came, along with friends from throughout the territory. There was food and music and dancing. Speeches were made, toasting the couple who had built such a legacy of love. Thomas, now 70 and gray-haired but still spry, stood to speak. "My sister came west looking for family, and she found so much more. Lucas, you have been not just a brother-in-law but a true brother to me. And Grace, you have built something remarkable here. Your love has created ripples that will extend through generations." Lucas stood, pulling Grace up with him. "I want to thank my wife," he said, his voice carrying across the crowd. 50 years ago, I offered her a ride in my wagon, and she took a chance on a stranger. Grace, you have made every single day of these 50 years a gift. You are still the most fascinating, beautiful, intelligent woman I know, and I fall in love with you more deeply every day." There was not a dry eye in the crowd. Grace, tears streaming down her face, stood on her toes to kiss her husband, and the crowd erupted in applause. As the celebration wound down and the guests departed, Grace and Lucas found themselves alone on the porch once more, their favorite place, their refuge through all the years. 50 years, Grace marveled. "It seems impossible." "Feels like just yesterday and also like forever," Lucas agreed. "Grace, I need to tell you something." She looked at him, hearing the serious note in his voice. "What is it?" "I am dying." Grace's breath caught. "What?" "The doctor confirmed it last month. My heart is wearing out. He says I have maybe a year, probably less." Lucas took her hand. "I did not want to tell you and ruin this celebration, but I cannot keep it from you any longer." Grace felt the world tilt. "There must be something they can do." "There is not. I am 73 years old, Grace. I have had a good, long life, a better life than I ever dreamed possible." He cupped her face gently. "Do not mourn me yet. I am still here. Let us make the most of whatever time we have left." The next months were bittersweet. Lucas grew weaker gradually, but he remained himself, thoughtful, kind, still able to make Grace laugh. He spent his days saying goodbye to the horses, to the land, to the life he had built. He made sure Joseph was prepared to take over the ranch completely. He wrote letters to each of his children and grandchildren, messages of love and wisdom to be opened after he was gone. Grace rarely left his side. They talked about everything: their children, their grandchildren, memories of their years together, hopes for the family's future. Sometimes they simply sat in silence, holding hands, drawing comfort from each other's presence. One warm afternoon in late spring, with the valley green and blooming, Lucas asked to be carried out to the porch one last time. Joseph and William gently moved him to his favorite chair, with Grace settling beside him. "Look at it," Lucas said softly, gazing at the valley. "Still the most beautiful place on earth." Grace held his hand, memorizing every detail of his face, this man she had loved for more than 50 years. "It is beautiful because we made it together." "Promise me something," Lucas said, his breathing labored now. "Anything. Promise me you will stay here in this house, on this land. Do not let anyone convince you to move to town or live with one of the children. This is your home. Stay here. I promise," Grace said through her tears. Lucas smiled. "That is good. I like thinking of you here, surrounded by family and memories." His eyes were growing heavy. "Grace, I loved you from the first moment I saw you. That has never changed, not for a single day. I love you too, Lucas, with everything I am." He squeezed her hand weakly. "It was a good life, wasn't it?" "The best life," Grace confirmed. "The very best." Lucas closed his eyes, still holding her hand, still smiling slightly. His breathing slowed, then stopped. And Grace sat with him as the sun set over the valley one last time, holding the hand of the man who had offered her a better destination all those years ago, and made every promise he had ever given her. The funeral was large, with people coming from all over the territory to pay their respects to Lucas Sterling, the man who had built a reputation on honesty and quality, who had raised a good family and lived a good life. Grace stood dry-eyed through most of it, holding herself together through sheer force of will, comforted by her children and grandchildren. But later, alone in the house she and Lucas had shared, she finally let herself cry. She cried for the loss, for the empty chair on the porch, for the silence where his voice had been. She cried for all the tomorrows they would not share, but she did not break. Lucas had built her up too strong for that. And she had promised to stay here in this place they had made together, and she would keep that promise. Grace lived for another 12 years after Lucas's death, remaining in the ranch house, surrounded by family. She grew to be a venerable matriarch, the keeper of family stories, the wise grandmother everyone came to for advice. She spent her days reading, tending her garden, and playing with her great-great-grandchildren. She never remarried, never even considered it. Lucas had been her great love, her partner, her best friend. No one could replace him. On a summer afternoon when Grace was 85 years old, she fell asleep in her chair on the porch and simply did not wake up. She slipped away peacefully. The valley spread out before her, the home she and Lucas had built still thriving with family and life and love. At her funeral, Joseph spoke for all the children. "Our mother was a remarkable woman. She came west on faith, married a cowboy rancher, and built a life that touched hundreds of people. She taught us to be strong, to be kind, to work hard, and to love deeply. She and our father created something that will last for generations. A family built on love, a legacy of integrity, and a ranch that will continue to thrive because they built it on solid ground." They buried Grace beside Lucas on a hill overlooking the valley, where they could watch over the land they had loved together. The entire family gathered, children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, 3 generations of love spreading out from that moment in Quartz Hill, when a worried woman met a kind cowboy and said yes to an unexpected journey. The ranch continues to this day, still in the Sterling family, still breeding horses that are sought after throughout the West. In the main house, now preserved as part of the ranch's history, you can still see Grace's books on the shelves, the cradle Lucas built for William, the table where they shared so many meals. And on the porch, 2 rocking chairs sit side by side facing the valley, a reminder of the couple who built this legacy. Visitors to the ranch often ask about the inscription on the stone marker at the edge of the property. It reads, "Sterling Ranch, established 1873. Built on love, faith, and the courage to accept a better destination." Because that is what Grace did, all those years ago in Quartz Hill. When the stagecoach did not come, when her careful plans fell apart, she had the courage to accept an unexpected offer from a kind stranger. And that choice, that leap of faith, led her to a destination better than any she could have imagined. A life full of love, family, purpose, and joy. A life lived fully with a partner who cherished her, in a place they made beautiful together. It was, in every way, the perfect ending to a love story that began with a missed stagecoach and a cowboy's simple offer of help. And though Grace and Lucas are long gone, their love story lives on in the land they worked, the family they raised, and the legacy they left behind. A legacy that proves that sometimes the best destinations are the ones we never planned for, the ones we find when we are brave enough to say yes to the unexpected, and the ones we build together with someone who sees us, truly sees us, and offers not just a ride but a whole new life.